Battlechasers Nightwar is a dungeon crawler with JRPG elements, mainly in the combat. Combat is turn-based. You get to run around the dungeons that are sort of action-packed. There are traps, there are puzzles. You see the creatures depicted on the map. Some of them have unique behavior. And the game starts with you in town, where you can put up to 3 members of 3 heroes into your party. There are a total of 6 that you unlock through the course of the story. Once you select them, they're locked in when you leave town. There's an overworld map where you can kind of explore the world, but it all leads into these dungeons, which is where we tell a story, drop loot, provide items for crafting. There are bosses, and they're randomly generated, so every time you come back, you're going to see something a little bit different. And each hero has unique combat abilities, of course, but they also have unique dungeon skills that help them deal with the traps, puzzles, and so on. It's set in a fantasy setting. It's sort of an arcane punk setting that infuses technology with fantasy. And we tell a lot of the story in the dungeons using these comic-inspired character panels. And our creative director and CEO, Joe Madureira, was previously in comics. Battlechasers actually started as a comic he created in the late 90s and 2000s. It was pretty popular, which we resurrected in this game when we started on Kickstarter, and after Kickstarter we signed with Jordan to help make the game a little bit bigger. Let's dive into the demo. So as I mentioned, each hero has different dungeon skills. Garrison here has a dash that you can use to avoid traps or to get away from creatures. As the dungeon skills level up, you have some choice in how they function. So I could actually upgrade this dash to be offensive. I could make it so that if I dash into a creature, it gives me an initiative bonus in combat. Gully here has a ground punch that can break walls that are secret. You can also use this to stun creatures, so if you want to avoid combat, say you're low on health or you're just trying to reach your objective, you can actually use that to avoid combat. But you don't want to avoid too much combat because crafting is a big part of the game. And you find some resources in dungeons. You may find ore nodes, or you may find different things you can interact with the ingredients. But creatures are probably the most significant source of some of the crafting materials you need to make the best stuff in the game. So you don't want to avoid combat too much. Once you're in combat, you'll see that this is a very familiar and classically inspired Final Fantasy JRPG style turn-based combat system. Those who have played those types of games, a lot of this probably looks familiar. Health, mana, these are the abilities across the bottom of the screen. Because it is turn-based, we depict the order of turns between the heroes and the creatures in this initiative bar. And the abilities are divided into 2 categories. These are instant and free, so they're like standard attacks. And you can see that right here, they'll perform the attack immediately. These all cost mana and have an associated cast time, which moves the hero back down the mission bar. So in this case, if I want to leave these 2 guys, Garrison's going to do it after the other 2 heroes and also after the skeleton has had a chance to make his own choice. But I'm just going to stick with the standard attacks for now. He pretty much just taunted me and did nothing to wait for him. He's a simple fodder guy, so they're easy to take out. This guy, on the other hand, is a little trickier. You can see up here it says he's casting arrow shot. It's going to go right now. This is after calibrating his turn. And the initiative bar in these fights, early in the game, it's not too important to pay attention to your order. It becomes more important in boss fights when you need to get an emergency heal off, or you need to make sure you do something before the boss does, or you just need to know when the boss is going to put pressure on your hero in combat. You can see as we're doing these standard attacks, it also builds up this resource here that extends off the mana bar called Overcharge. Overcharge is like a temporary mana that only lasts the duration of the fight, but any ability you perform that takes mana would use the Overcharge first. So it's a way that you can use some of these cool attacks without feeling like you need to save all your mana for the boss. You can do some of these attacks now and save your mana when you get to the boss. Or if you run out of mana because you get put in a particularly tough situation, you can use Overcharge in fights to build this back up and still cast it. So you're never really totally out of mana. So I'm going to go ahead and since I have some Overcharge built up here, I'm going to go ahead and do a cheap heal just to top it. When you do a heal, if you were trying to heal, we'll go ahead and do the heal even after the creature's dead. So it advances the heal and you heal off. See, we dropped a couple of crafting units here. So crafting, the actual act of crafting is pretty straightforward. I like to just found it here. This dungeon is randomly generated. Even limited to the demo, so I don't know where it is necessarily. The active crafting is really straightforward. You have the ingredients, you add the right crafting station, you can make the item. What makes it sort of unique is that while there is some basic crafting in town, the best crafting stations that make the best here are down inside the dungeons. So you actually go into the random dungeons and discover the locations of the crafting stations. Every dungeon has a crafting station in somewhere, but sometimes you'll find really rare crafting stations that let you improve the gear you already made, or refine materials into better materials, or even take two weapons or pieces of armor and combine them together to make like super versions of those items. So in this case, I'm going to make gear here, this armor that I see is improving the gully. Go ahead and put that on her. I'm ready to go start trying to find the boss here. Let's see if I can figure out where it is. I'll fight this guy right now. Again. I'll get behind him. See if I can find him. This may be a resource area. Resources. The dungeon skills all have a limited number of uses. So you have to be careful when you use them because right now I've got 6 dashes. A dash is something that is more commonly used, but like in the case of Gully Stun, because that's pretty powerful, allowing me to skip combat, I only get a limited number of those, so I only have 1 left. So I'm going to go ahead and there is a boss in this dungeon. I'm not sure where he is, so I'm going to skip back out and show you another boss fight that we don't get to demo a lot. So when you're in the overworld, there are airships that are flying around, and occasionally you may get ambushed by one while you're on one. The overworld map is note-based. There are encounters in the overworld. There are rare NPCs. You may encounter rare vendors. We have a guy called the Gambler who wanders the overworld, and if you find him, you're able to gamble your weapons and items and gold, hopefully for something better. But sometimes if you get an airship, you get one of these random airship battles. They're all tough, they're all boss level, and after you complete them, you get to fight like the airship captain. In this case, these 2 guys are tough fights. If I don't focus, I probably will actually die. So the last element of combat that I didn't cover is the battle burst system. So you'll see that as I do damage or take damage, the first meter will fill up. And what that does is lets my heroes perform super attacks. And they're either 100, 200, or 300 point super attacks. And this is a shared resource. So as soon as it's full, I can pick whichever hero I want to do a super attack, and they are instant. And they can turn the tide of battle. Sometimes they're really important to survive a fight like this versus this process. Now these guys work as a pair, and they each have unique attacks, and when one dies, the other is going to get really mad. So I need to decide how it is I want to fight him, because this guy has the most armor, and this guy does the most damage. So if I kill him first, and this guy enrages, it's going to be a long fight. But if I kill him first, this guy is going to do a lot of damage, and it's really unpredictable. I'm going to take him out first. I got to get some demons ready. I'm going to build up some overcharge with him, and I'll show you a unique ability that I can do using overcharge as I get back to him. And I use Gully to cast a shield, which is like whenever I hit one, you can see the blue bar on the underneath the hit points. And that's really important when these guys start doing some of their abilities that have peaky damage. So the other interesting thing about overcharge is that some abilities have an additional effect if you use overcharge when you use the ability. So in this case, Warblade is kind of like execute, where for every point of overcharge I use when I cast it, it'll do additional damage. So it does a lot of damage by itself, less than a really expensive ability would, but if I do with a lot of overcharge, it becomes one of the most efficient damaging abilities that we have. So that ability is dangerous. Now it's putting a lot of pressure on my healers, so I'm going to have to. So I have enough now to do at least a level 1 battle burst. He's the only one that currently has one equipped. You can actually change the battle burst or equip on the heroes in town. Do a single target kill on him. Fortunately, I had the damage shield on Garrison, so that didn't hurt him. But I can get rid of it once we're I'm going to keep the damage shield up. Okay, so I'm going to do a battle burst here on him. This this one is nice because it's cheap and it puts really high damage over time lead on the thing, so it'll ignore his armor, which is good. Now the trick with bosses is that regular creatures don't have their own battle bursts, but bosses do. So at some point, these guys are going to get angry enough that they're going to trigger their own battle burst, and if I'm not ready for it, it's going to be deadly. So now I see up here, because the bestiary keeps track of everything we've done with the creature, so it would tell me all of this would be hidden to me, it would be all question marks. But because we've played these guys enough, it's unlocking their hit points, their names, their strengths and weaknesses, and in this case also what their abilities are. So I know that Twin Fury, you could open up the bestiary, which we're not showing right now, in combat, and I would know that Twin Fury is basically their battle burst, their super attack. And I don't know who he's casting it on right now because I haven't unlocked that bestiary yet, but I know I need to try and get ready. So she's going to cast everything after him though, so I'm just going to assume that I'm going to need to do a lot of healing after it. So we have this, when one of them is dead, they can no longer cast their battle burst. So I'm only going to have to deal with one. If I didn't have that shield up on her, she'd very likely be dead. So he's going to die now, maybe even just from the bleed, so I could ignore him. Start working on the other guy. Maybe I'll do that. So that other guy, it was his turn, but he had 3 stacks of bleeds on him, so he died. Now this guy is enraged. And so he's going to start doing some, pretty much every ability he does has the potential to kill one of my heroes now. So I've got to keep my hit points up and my shield up. I'm going to wait until I have a level 3 battle burst with Garrison, because that's the one that does the most damage. The others both have battle bursts that hit mere groups, but since there are no groups live now, just one target, I'm gonna save up the Garrison battle burst. So this is the thing I have to worry about. So you can see that took away all the shield and almost half the hit points. So I got a long way to go. Fortunately, that when he hits everybody, it gives me a ton of battle burst, so I have enough now to save that. This is the highest damage one currently. That did a lot. So Raging Rush, this is that ability that does a lot of damage. I think I'll be okay, even though this is where Shield's going to go off after him, but I think I have enough hit points to survive. Okay, so this fight just got a lot closer. I have a little bit of overcharge built up, but I feel like I need pressure, so I'm still going to use Warblade anyway. He's got a lead on him, I don't think it's going to be able to go. This will probably get him right here. Would be my call. There we go. That's Battlechasers Network. Does anybody have any questions?